Tonight, the president goes on national television to announce he's sending 30,000 more U.S. troops into a war that's already cost more than 900 American lives.
We must keep the pressure on al-Qaeda, and to do that, we must increase the stability and capacity of our partners in the region.
As he lays out his new strategy for Afghanistan, the road ahead. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, is the war winnable? As a U.S. troop buildup helps take back one Afghan town, some say buying off the Taliban may be more effective than fighting them. And as the new troops prepare to deploy, their families feel the pain and strain of separation.
He took it pretty hard, yeah. But he's a good kid. He's strong.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
And this is a special Western edition. Good evening, everyone. As you may have seen, President Obama addressed the nation tonight from the U.S. Military Academy and told us how he plans to finish the job in Afghanistan. With fewer than 2 out of 5 Americans approving of his handling of the war, and after months of deliberation, he's decided to send in 30,000 more U.S. troops. The first of them will be there by Christmas. The goal, putting down a resurgence of the Taliban and rooting out al-Qaeda. The president also said he'll begin pulling U.S. forces out of Afghanistan in the summer of 2011. The price tag for his new strategy as much as $30 billion for the first year. Chief White House correspondent Chip Reid begins tonight's coverage from West Point.
The president told his audience of West Point officers and cadets that he's ordered 30,000 additional troops to Afghanistan, 3 combat brigades and 1 training brigade, bringing the total to about 100,000 American troops. The president wants the troops in place by next summer, faster than any option initially presented by the Pentagon.
The 30,000 additional troops that I'm announcing tonight will deploy in the first part of 2010, the fastest possible pace, so that they can target the insurgency and secure key population centers. They'll increase our ability to train competent Afghan security forces and to partner with them so that more Afghans can get into the fight. And they will help create the conditions for the United States to transfer responsibility to the Afghans.
The president said speed is also important in getting the troops out, with the first wave coming home after just 1 year.
These are the resources that we need to seize the initiative while building the Afghan capacity that can allow for a responsible transition of our forces out of Afghanistan.
The president invoked the memory of 9/11 to remind Americans why the war in Afghanistan is so important.
If I did not think that the security of the United States and the safety of the American people were at stake in Afghanistan, I would gladly order every single one of our troops home tomorrow. So no, I do not make this decision lightly. I make this decision because I am convinced that our security is at stake in Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is the epicenter of violent extremism practiced by al-Qaeda. It is from here that we were attacked on 9/11, and it is from here that new attacks are being plotted as I speak. This is no idle danger, no hypothetical threat. In the last few months alone, we have apprehended extremists within our borders who were sent here from the border region of Afghanistan and Pakistan to commit new acts of terror. And this danger will only grow if the region slides backwards, and al-Qaeda can operate with impunity. We must keep the pressure on al-Qaeda, and to do that, we must increase the stability and capacity of our partners in the region. These facts compel us to act along with our friends and allies. Our overarching goal remains the same: to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and to prevent its capacity to threaten America and our allies in the future.
The war in Afghanistan is not just America's war, the president argued, and he expects other nations to do their part, too.
I've asked that our commitment be joined by contributions from our allies. Some have already provided additional troops, and we're confident that there will be further contributions in the days and weeks ahead. Our friends have fought and bled and died alongside us in Afghanistan, and now we must come together to end this war successfully. For what's at stake is not simply a test of NATO's credibility. What's at stake is the security of our allies and the common security of the world.
The president also said success will require a renewed focus on Pakistan, where members of al-Qaeda, including Osama bin Laden, are believed to be hunkered down in remote mountains.
We're in Afghanistan to prevent a cancer from once again spreading through that country. But this same cancer has also taken root in the border region of Pakistan. And that's why we need a strategy that works on both sides of the border. Moving forward, we are committed to a partnership with Pakistan that is built on a foundation of mutual interest, mutual respect, and mutual trust.
The White House is well aware that one speech is not going to turn the tide on Afghanistan. This is just the first step in convincing the American public that the Afghanistan war is worth even more American blood and treasure. Chip Reed, CBS News, West Point.
So here's where we stand. 8 years after the U.S. drove the Taliban from power, they once again control large portions of Afghanistan. Their strongholds include Helmand province in the south and in the east, the area near the Pakistani border. Most of the new U.S. troops will be headed to those regions to try to defeat the Taliban one town at a time. As David Martin reports, it's the extension of a strategy that's beginning to show results.
17 Americans were killed in Afghanistan in November, less than a third the number killed the previous month. It's only one measure, but it suggests things are no longer getting worse. As long ago as August, that's what General Stanley McChrystal, the commander there, told his staff.
I do think that we probably have bottomed out in terms of that.
That's because earlier this year, President Obama ordered 21,000 more troops to Afghanistan. Ask Captain Paul Shepard what a difference that made in one violent town south of Kabul.
We've seen a complete 180, and we've seen that because I think we've flooded the area with soldiers. We've gone from 500 to 5,000.
Despite pockets of success, Joint Chiefs Chairman Mullen still thinks overall conditions are deteriorating. It's a fine line, but as Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institution points out, if after 8 years you can't tell who's winning and who's losing, something's wrong.
You could also simply say, right now it's too close to call, and that's not a very good place to be in.
Some of the most successful operations have been commando raids against insurgent leaders, like this firebrand in western Afghanistan. But this is a war the U.S. cannot kill its way out of. American soldiers and Marines must clear out enemy strongpoints, hold that territory, and build a better life for the Afghan people.
We're doing pretty well on clear and hold, pretty lousy on build.
As a result, much of the population is sitting on the fence, waiting to see which side can offer them the better deal. Call it a stalemate at best, but with 30,000 more troops, an aide to McChrystal says we are going to turn this quickly and seize the initiative. David Martin, CBS News, The Pentagon.
More U.S. troops will mean more firepower, but as David pointed out, guns alone won't win the war in Afghanistan. That's why there's a new effort underway to persuade members of the Taliban to leave their ranks, in some cases by paying them off. From Kabul, here's Mandy Clark.
A battle without winners is how one U.S. military source described the fight against the Taliban. Some American commanders admit there may never be enough U.S. boots on the ground to end the insurgency. If a military victory isn't achievable, then ending the war might rely on small victories, like this one. Wakhil Ahmed Muktawel works to translate the Quran into other languages. Before 9/11, he was the Taliban foreign minister. He now urges talk, not war. In fighting, you bleed. In talks, you sweat, he says. It's better to sweat. Some Taliban have come to the table for talks with the Afghan government. Others have been put on the payroll in a program supported by U.S. tax dollars. The so-called $10 Taliban are paid to put down their arms.
Taliban reconciliation, do you think it's a viable option?
I think it's the only option. I don't think that Afghanistan's going to succeed going forward unless there's some political dialogue with the insurgency.
You can't buy loyalty here, but you can rent it. Afghan commanders have a history of switching sides without stigma. There's even a term for it, turning your turban.
Thousands have turned away from the insurgency. But the hardcore Taliban, also estimated in the thousands, will never turn. We know that there are a lot of servants and spies of America under the name of the Taliban who take the money from the enemy, he says. If we catch them, we will behead them. This former Taliban member, who asked for his identity to be protected, wants to unite the country. Interestingly, he has the same concerns about President Karzai's administration as the U.S. government. Government corruption and infighting are stopping more Taliban from switching sides, he says. Another obstacle to reconciliation could be the tens of thousands of new troops the president is sending to Afghanistan. As one Taliban fighter told us, more troops means more war. Mandy Clark, CBS News, Kabul.
Coming up next here on the CBS Evening News, the Florida Highway Patrol slaps Tiger Woods with a traffic ticket and declares case closed. In other news, the hunt for the suspect in the murders of 4 Lakewood, Washington police officers came to a sudden end early this morning. But as John Blackstone tells us, the investigation isn't over.
In a grim procession, the bodies of the 4 murdered officers were moved to a funeral home today. Earlier, the body of their suspected killer was moved from the Seattle street where he was shot before dawn. A police officer checking a stolen car recognized 37-year-old Maurice Clemens as the object of an intense manhunt. When Clemens refused to stop, the officer opened fire.
This is a tragedy. No one feels good about any of this.
After shooting him dead, police found Clemens had a gun belonging to one of the murdered officers, and he had a wound from the coffee shop shootout.
He was shot dead center, right here, right dead center in the middle where we're trained to shoot.
Investigators today arrested 3 of the half-dozen people they say helped Clemens run.
They tried to do some medical aid. They tried to move him from residence. They tried to hide him. They supplied him with cell phones. They supplied him with money.
Clemens was released on bail just a week ago, even though a psychological report in October warned that he was dangerous. He told psychiatrists he had visualizations of people drinking blood and people eating babies. Meantime, conservative bloggers are criticizing former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee for commuting Clemens' sentence in 2000. Huckabee fought back today.
People use anything for a political weapon.
Among them, the slain officers leave behind 9 children. At a community memorial, Michelle Hankins brought her daughter Evelyn to pay their respects. Many of the people coming here didn't know those murdered personally, but at least one man came because Officer Tina Griswold put him on the right track growing up.
I was about to say I was a bad apple, but Miss Griswold was one of the people that made sour apples good.
Here at the headquarters of the Lakewood Police Department, the memorial to the 4 murdered officers continues to grow. But for many coming here, the death of the suspected killer does little to end the pain. John Blackstone, CBS News, Lakewood, Washington.
President Obama is finding out what all presidents do, that running for president is a lot different than being president. All the problems he talked about during the campaign, war, the economy, health care, are now his to solve. His once sky-high approval ratings have inevitably come down to earth as perceptions of the president become reality. With more about that, here's our senior political correspondent, Jeff Greenfield.
How did he get from this to this?
When you look at my record, it's very clear what I've done so far, and that is nothing.
The problem for the White House is that this satirical view is being offered from voices that should be in his corner, voices that could both reflect and reinforce a politically damaging narrative.
Nope.
Recent weeks have seen a barrage of friendly fire. Les Gelb, a Democratic foreign policy expert, calls Obama's Asian trip amateur hour. The New York Times' Maureen Dowd compares him to Mr. Spock. A New York Magazine cover story detects the air hissing out of the Obama balloon. And longtime liberal writer Elizabeth Drew reports of growing disillusion.
There is a critical mass of people who really wish him well, think it's terribly important that he succeed. We're becoming disappointed, even disillusioned.
A bad economy and 2 long wars are bound to feed discontent. But discontent can lead to other narratives. For instance, the idea that he is too much with us, or that he's relying on his wit, his intelligence, and his prudence, rather than a visceral connection with the voter.
But as we're getting to understand his presidential style more, there are definitely people who feel that it is too detached, too cool, too cerebral, and not visceral enough.
Presidents can fall or rise on such impressions. Gerald Ford was a skilled athlete whose occasional stumbles became a metaphor for incompetence. Bill Clinton survived a sex scandal because while people wouldn't trust him with their daughters, they did trust him with the economy. Ronald Reagan's clarity on his core beliefs sustained him. After less than a year in office, it's far too early to conclude that Obama's narrative is etched in stone.
It's very, very risky and even silly to say, well, here's how it is now, here is how it's always going to look and be.
What can change a narrative? Well, a major speech on a war like tonight's can define a president as a strong leader, provided, of course, the policy he is announcing works. Katie?
Jeff Greenfield. Jeff, thank you. And coming up next, the Americans who make up the new surge in Afghanistan and the families they're leaving behind. And finally tonight, in 8 years of war in Afghanistan, 929 Americans have died, nearly 300 this year alone. And as the president sends thousands more troops into the war, our chief national correspondent Byron Pitts tells us their families are already feeling the pain.
In South Burlington, Vermont, Mike Papaparello would rather spend these last days of fall playing football with his 8-year-old son, Kevin. Instead, this National Guardsman is packing for his first deployment to Afghanistan and preparing to watch the president's speech tonight.
I would like to hear from the Commander-in-Chief a solid vision to solidify the situation over there. 1,500 Vermont Guardsmen have been training in this mock-up Afghan village in Jericho, Vermont. Their mission? Train the Afghan National Army and police. One of the hardest parts of going to war, the major says, telling his wife, daughter, and especially his son. He took it pretty hard, yeah. But he's a good kid. He's strong.
This is the largest deployment of the Vermont National Guard to a war zone since World War II. The citizens of this small state know well the high cost of war, but so do many American families.
The crater was 7 feet deep and 28 feet wide, and the striker flipped over and caught on fire, and it burned all night long.
Julie and Mark Ahmad got the grim news last month. Their son, 22-year-old specialist Aaron Ahmad from Custer, Washington, was killed when his vehicle hit an IED in Afghanistan. Despite their loss, they support their president's decision to send more troops.
If we don't send more troops in now, they're going to continue to pick us off, just like they have been doing, and we'll lose them 1 and 2 and 6 and 7 and 8 at a time, like what has happened with Aaron's unit.
A common question we heard from military families across the nation tonight: what's the president's exit strategy?
I'd like to hear what the mission is and then what he's going to do to ensure that we can accomplish that. Happy Thanksgiving.
In Richland, Michigan, Barb Patterson celebrated Thanksgiving with her 25-year-old son, David. He's a corporal in the Marines, serving in Afghanistan, home on leave.
He has to get enough hugs to last him till the end of his deployment, and I've been trying to do that during the past 2 weeks.
Back in Vermont, Major Papaparello's wife, Beth, knows the feeling.
It's scary to think about him going over there.
Tonight, like much of the nation, this family will listen to the Commander-in-Chief and do what military families always do: their duty. Byron Pitts, CBS News, South Burlington, Vermont.
That's our special Western edition of the CBS Evening News. I'm Katie Couric. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. For the latest news online, you can go to cbsnews.com. Good night.